Welcome back to the second day at Copenhagen Concert Hall, and welcome to CFS Plus, Global Fashion Agenda's online event on sustainable fashion. I'm Eva Kruse. I'm going to be your host, as I was yesterday. I hope you enjoyed the day. The CFS Plus is actually presented under a headline called Redefining Value. That's supposed to prompt us to think about how can we create value for people, but also value in terms of prosperity for our business. However, the industry is also challenged when it comes to use of natural resources. So value is a big concept for our industry in the given time. The crisis has given us an opportunity to reset, to rethink and learn. An opportunity to actually rebuild the fashion industry for a more sustainable and more resilient future. But only if we stop taking short-term actions. Welcome to CFS Plus second day. Now in this next segment, I'm going to speak to one of the great leaders of the moment, the president and CEO of Gucci, who is making bold commitments on behalf of the planet, but certainly also on Gucci. But since he couldn't join me here in Copenhagen, I'm calling him up in his office in Milan. Ciao, Marco.
Ciao.
How has it been for you these past, 8-10 months for you, for Gucci, in Italy?
My experience has been the same experience of many other people. I mean, the big difference that I had is that I stopped flying after 40 years, more or less. I mean, that is, for the first time I realized how much tiring is flying, because when you do something, you just need to do it and you don't realize, and your body is always in jet lag, and it looks like it's part of the game. In reality, it's not part of the game. So that, in a way, has been a positive, the fact of not flying any longer. The negative, of course, you don't have the chance to interact with people, visiting people, motivating people.
Yeah. What about for the business? How did you steer through that?
No, the business is being, as you know, I mean, having a company that is mainly based on physical shop, brick and mortar shops. There was a certain moment where we had like 90% of the shops closed. So there's nothing that you can really do than trying to protect your people and to make sure that because there always been this kind of dilemma when the company goes well, right? Everybody's talking about values, talking about principles, protecting people first, etc., etc. The real, to me, the real, proof is when you have problems, and where you can really see if these values are real or just fake.
I think during this COVID crisis, what has been very clear to me is that societies, companies, even individuals were able to change a lot of behaviors or things that we used to do when a crisis hit. But it also became very clear to me that there was a painfully visible action gap between what we were able to do in the COVID, but what we're missing doing on the climate side. So in your perspective, what's your thought on how can we use sort of a momentum like this to sort of also make more proactive actions towards climate?
If we go back to the Paris Agreement, in order to maintain the temperature growth below 1.5%, 1.5 Celsius grades, in 2015 we needed to decrease the impact of 3.6% every year. But because we lost 5 years, now this number is 7.6, 7.5. So it means that if you don't take action immediately, there's no time left. And we cannot hope of another COVID next year in order to reduce the emission, right? Because in a way you're gonna be sick. The economy is not growing, so we need to find a way to impact. So that. And again, it's, I'm from a generation where I was not very, my priority was not the climate, because when I was born, I mean, that certainly was not the priority of the world, of my priority. So I learned, I study, I listen to scientists, I listen to people that know much more than myself. That's the reason why we are always trying to evolve the way in which ourselves in Gucci are able to reduce our impact. So we did many initiatives in the past. We are launching new initiative now, and I think that at the very end, for what I read in the last few months, few years, I mean, at the end, if I have one point that could be interesting for me to keep in mind is that when we talk about nature and climate, we think of nature in terms of a victim of the climate. In reality, nature can be an actor to change the climate. It depends very much how you use it and what kind of transformation you do on the agriculture. So there are many ways.
Elaborate more on that. I think that's interesting.
Now we are moving in a new kind of strategy. Is now a natural climate-based solution, where not only we protect, but we try to restore as well. The other part that is managing, and there where we can really give an impact is Gucci, because our supply chain is quite widespread everywhere, and managing means that we want to switch our supply chain to regenerative agriculture, in the sense that we want to make sure that our farmers, they move out chemicals from their soil, because I mean at the moment we have just 60% of the soil that is left, and in 40, 50 years no topsoil will be left any longer, so no food will be left any longer. So we need to act on that. And the way in which we want to do that is to make sure that if they are able to switch to regenerative agriculture, they're able to absorb carbon emission in the land, they're gonna create revenue because they can sell the credit of this carbon. And also the kind of wool or cotton or leather that they're going to produce for us is going to be, in a way, less, more sound, let's put it this way, because it's coming from something that is not impacted by chemicals. Gucci is a drop in the ocean. I cannot think that we are going to impact dramatically the planet. But certainly, that's the reason why I launched the Carbon Neutral Challenge, because the point is, today, what I listen is that everybody's setting target 2050, 2060. I mean, 2060, I will be 90 years old. I will be probably managing Gucci. But, but if not, I cannot leave to my successor targets that are not mine. Doesn't make any sense. And also, it's going to be too late. I think people, they need to understand, they need to move for what they can now.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Ciao, ciao, ciao.
Thank you. Ciao.
Value is the benefit that you and all the other people involved in that situation receive. So that might mean when you buy a product, the value that you get from owning it and wearing it, but also the value that the people that made it and the people that sold it, the people that made the yarns and the fibers that made the yarns, all those people have to receive some sort of value. Otherwise, that's not really the true value of the garment.
Value is about fundamental changes in the way that businesses is done today. The way that the world consumes, rethinking of business models, supply chains, and how society values goods and services.
Value is keeping the promises.
We all assign value to various things. Value is something that delivers common good and shared benefit for all.
Value is changing a system for better.
Value is family, value is friendship. So overall, value is trust.
What would be different and how would we act if value were the biodiversity that we have around us, rather than basing it on gold or things? And so I feel like it's time for us to redefine value.
Value is purpose. It is the reason for being. It is how we justify our existence.
Value is designing a product perfectly for someone.
Fashion is fun, fabulous, and fancy. But did you know that fashion is also closely linked to agriculture? The production, use, and disposal of the materials used for clothes has a massive negative impact on the total variety of life on Earth, which is called biodiversity. Cotton production alone accounts for 22.5% of the world's total pesticide use. Approximately 20% of industrial water pollution comes from textile dyeing and treatment, and 72% of all clothes end up in landfills, which is a substantial waste of resources. Actually, we risk losing up to 300 species per hectare every time a new landfill site is developed. And no matter how disconnected you feel from nature in your daily life, your whole existence is based on it, and so is our global economy. Right now, fashion is making the world a little less colorful and lively. Surely, that was never the intention. So how does fashion go from being part of the problem to being part of the solution? Let's take a look at shoes as an example. Every year, we produce 11 billion pairs of leather shoes, using 65% of the world's leather. Brazil is one of the world's top producers of bovine leather. That means cattle. Brazil is also home to the majority of the Amazon rainforest, and cattle ranching has been responsible for about 80% of all deforestation in the region, making it the world's largest single driver of deforestation. This has dire consequences for the biodiversity of our planet, because the Amazon has more plant and animal species per square meter than anywhere else in the world. This is the Iquitos gnatcatcher. This little gray and white bird was discovered as late as 2005, and now there are only a few hundred left in the wild. And then there's the Peruvian woolly monkey, the giant Brazilian otter, the white-bellied spider monkey, and all the other plants and animals that are now threatened by extinction before we even got to know them. So what can the fashion industry do to save them? The fashion industry must act now, and there are a lot of possible solutions, like going from animal leather to things like fruit. The pineapple industry globally produces 40,000 tons of waste pineapple leaves each year, which are usually left to rot or burn. The waste from 16 pineapple plants creates enough leather-like material to make one pair of men's shoes, and the leftover biomass from the process can be used as a fertilizer. Sustainable bio-leather can also be made from oranges, mushrooms, seaweed, cork, or even grown in a lab. But innovative and eco-friendly products like these can only be a success if they become commercially viable and scalable, which requires investments from the industry. It's time to invest in biodiversity because there's no Planet B.
It is important to constantly challenge our thinking. And one of the ways to do that is to listen to people who have a different opinion from your own. That's why we've created this format called Real Talk, where we grant the stage to different perspectives from the world. The next Real Talker is Mrika Kapadia, who together with Amit Kumar has founded Nor Black Nor White, a women-led brand in India. We give her the opportunity to share her personal views and opinion about our industry.
People finally seem to be waking up with a sense of urgency around sustainable living and practices. Before the value system can be redesigned, we believe it needs to be redefined. What is the current definition of success? Rapid growth seems to be the contemporary capitalistic model that has been driving this idea of success. And it's taken a little too long to realize that it's simply not working or true. How many contracts were canceled during this pandemic? To thousands of factories that provide the livelihood of millions of workers. We were nervous at the thought of not being able to raise the income in a time where the world was shutting down. However, we were blessed to learn that our community really came through for us. It was a pre-order model that we ended up putting out in June. It blew our minds how many people supported this model just to keep supporting our work because they have been educated about our process since the very beginning. If our small business can see glimpses of success in this model, in a time when we thought no one would really care. We know that the challenge isn't the customers aren't willing to wait, but it's the companies that are creating false expectations of faster being better. Diversity desperately needs to be redefined. Diversity and representation is crucial to reflecting the real people with the purchasing power for this industry. And this simply cannot be a token or trend in a marketing campaign. Experiencing the outright racism that we have faced in the global trade show circuit, where retail buyers have had no time or space or interest to learn about emerging designers from the global south, have told us that we would do a little bit more better if we used white models in our lookbooks and presentations and tone down the ethnic patterns and colors in our textiles and presentation. It was these lessons that we learned that truly carved out why we are here and what we are here to do. Sustainability, the hottest new trend in fashion. The terms need to be defined from all the people that are actually part of this process, and not just the people who have access to these type of panels or who are sitting in boardrooms. How we create and who we create with is essential to aligning with our values. This acts as a microcosm of how we move in this world, within our own families, communities, the environment, this industry, and a planet at large. Treating people and nature with dignity and respect. Every day, leading with empathy, paying fair wages, celebrating the lineage of skill and craftsmanship, true diversity, and creating a working environment of care while operating with nothing but love are just the basics of what we believe should be including in redefining new models of success.
Change. Imagination.
Co-creation.
Equality.
Perspective.
Prioritize.
Measuring.
Overdue. Compassion.
Storytelling.
Beauty.
Longevity. Inclusive. Craft of use.
Fashion is one of the world's largest industries. It's a powerful engine for development and growth. However, it's also one of the world's most resource-intensive, and the current business model is pushing the planet towards its boundaries and challenging social justice. Who better to have a discussion about the growth of the fashion industry within the planet's boundaries than the new group CEO of H&M, Helena Helmersson, together with Professor Johan Rockström, who actually is the father of the concept planetary boundaries. They met in Helena's summer house in the beautiful forests right outside Stockholm.
Let's do this.
Yeah, whenever you're ready.
Yeah. Hi, Johan.
Hello.
What's on your table?
The planet.
Yeah, right. We had to make sure that we can touch people, give hope, but also lead the industry to a more sustainable future. And of course also financially, so that we stay resilient.
Whether we like it or not, we have to admit that now we're forced as scientists to pose the question, are we at risk of destabilizing the planet? To begin with, we have just 10 years now to turn things around. We need to cut global emissions by half, and we need to halt biodiversity loss. And simply, you know, it's like having this oil tanker running at full speed in the wrong direction, and we have to not only pull the brakes, but turn 90 degrees on a completely new trajectory. And now is the time to recognize that there's no longer enough to do some little corporate social responsibility here, or have some environmental projects here, or feel good that we have some positive success on the margins. Now is the time to go big, because now is the time to become fully sustainable. And that's where I think that for a company like H&M, because you're such a big player globally, I mean, you have so many ripple effects just by your presence. The circular model, I think, is quite frankly is the future.
Yeah.
From essentially all sectors actually, but certainly for the textile industry, not only because it's the only way to align with the stability of the planet, but also because I foresee that will be the only way to make money. I mean, to really make net income.
We have also found that when setting our own targets, like on climate, for example, 2040, it should be climate positive. It's a difference from setting such a goal. It's not about doing less harm. It's about turning it into something
fundamentally good.
But of course, when you set these kind of long-term targets, you need to also do some sub-goals so that you see, okay, what's the next step? Otherwise, you would think somebody else will fix that. And it's the same with biodiversity and commitments that we have made, that we want to have a positive impact. And that gives a totally different energy, obviously, and a different kind of urgency to the whole question. The key is that circularity will bring profitability, otherwise it's not sustainable at all. But I truly believe that's the future. That's kind of, at least for me, the solution to the decoupling.
No, it's not only the solution. It's on the long term. It's a necessity for the decoupling. And the drama is that we've been for so long allowed ourselves to do the completely wrong thing. I mean, to have these linear production models where we just exploit for free, add value, sure, make profit, sure, have economic growth, sure, but then create waste, which then pollutes and creates problems downstream. And this linear model in all sectors need to be broken simply because we're hitting the limits of the capacity of the planet.
I do think that where we have a sense of urgency, that's to move much faster. And how can we do that? Because we're dependent on different techniques to be there. We have to change the supply chain if it's going to be fully circular. So there's a lot more to do, where I think the pace that we've had in the past cannot be the pace that we have in the future.
No.
We can't really wait for everybody's awareness, because it's so much more urgency in this question. So how can we be part of influencing customer behaviors, which is also responsibility or an opportunity, whatever way you see it, that we have because of our size.
We need to define growth in a way that internalizes all the natural capital. Let's not focus on gross national product or kind of the gross growth. Let's focus on the net income that we make. You know that better than anyone in the business world, that the net income, you of course have your income or your profit and deduct all the costs. But in those costs, you have to include all the natural capital as well. All the resources that you're taking out from the biosphere has to be valued in a way that gives you a better sense of where you are in terms of net real, true net profit.
We also need to look at how do we diversify the different revenue streams. So the renting we have started with, or fixing broken garments, or looking at these kind of different business models. That's a different way of finding revenue streams that are more kind of circular in themselves, or kind of make sense when decoupling growth from the use of natural resources. But for us, it's really about doing it faster, changing our core, and also looking at new type of growth.
But then also on your point about decoupling, I mean, I think it's that's the holy grail for the world, to be able to show that we can have good economic development while reducing the negative impacts.
Yes.
The problem is, as you know, that when you look at the experience, not many have succeeded. In fact, a country like Sweden has decoupled officially, but that's only because we are importing so much of our consumer goods.
Right.
With the COVID-19 crisis, this is the moment to fully integrate health, sustainability with the social justice side.
When I see who's suffering most, at least with my perspective, looking at the business of the H&M Group, that's obviously the production countries. It becomes so clear how everything is connected.
Yeah, exactly.
That you can't talk about sustainability only as the planet or environmental questions. What can be our role in a situation like this? When we close, demand goes down, they get out of job, they have limited social security. How can we come together and be part of solving that in a good way?
I find that that we're faced with two challenges. I mean, one is the social justice challenge, that now that we are such a big world on such a small planet, we have to share the remaining space on Earth in an equitable way. Where, of course, fundamentally, it's about how much atmosphere can we consume, how much fresh water, how much. I mean, that's one justice. But you're right that the other one is really. So how do we secure that people have, some safety nets in life?
Yes. And what's so important for us is that we are seen as a company that walk the talk.
Growth just means something is getting larger. The environmentalist Edward Abbey said, growth for the sake of growth alone is the mindset of a cancer.
When we talk about prosperity and growth together, we often link both to financial growth and financial prosperity. What is really important is to link prosperity to what is good for our environment in ways other than that is measurable by actually dollars and cents.
The global economy will need to slow down.
Growth is not the Northern Star for prosperity. Sustainability is the Northern Star.
It's really critical for sustained prosperity that you have sufficient growth to support it.
I can feel very rich without having lots of new stuff the whole time.
It's a $2.5 to $3 trillion industry. Let's use that GDP power as a force for good in the world, so growth can be universal, not just financial.
It is not possible to talk about prosperity without the growth. It's impossible.
Well, prosperity in fashion today should be measured by a company's carbon footprint and its positive impact on its community, and I think this really needs to be done.
You might think your shirt is a simple product, but actually, a lot of people have been involved in the process of making that shirt. From the cotton farms and cotton mills to the dyeing facilities, button suppliers, and manufacturers, all the way to the brand warehouses and their retail shelves. All these involved parties have a stake in the final product. This is called a value chain. And while there are recent examples of good behavior from brands, the value chain of fashion has a history of being both complex and filled with conflicting interests. Despite the fact that everyone in fashion's value chain is closely connected, everyone is primarily looking out for themselves. So can the idea of equal partnerships change this industry mindset and advance collective progress in the future? Right now, the fashion industry is an industry that lacks the thread that stitches solid relationships together: trust. To put it simply, there are two kinds of partnerships in the fashion industry. One is the typical transactional-based partnership, where the primary things tying the two parties together are money and legal documents. These partnerships are often asymmetrical, because as buyers, brands usually have the upper hand over their suppliers. Accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic, there have been many cases of broken relationships across the value chain in 2020. Major brands and retailers canceled or postponed their orders, including those already produced, while COVID-19 forced store closures around the world. In Bangladesh alone, it is estimated that the unpaid orders amount to $3 billion, with grave consequences for workers in these factories, many of whom are women, who are important providers for their families. The second kind of partnership is the relationship-based partnership, a respectful and mutually beneficial relation that encourages joint solutions, innovation, and shared financial incentives. Right now, people everywhere are standing up against unfairness and demanding justice across gender, race, economical status, political viewpoints, and more. So the future belongs to forward-looking brands who know that unfair ways of doing business will also no longer be tolerated by consumers. The pandemic has also proven that the most resilient companies to combat this and future crises have been the ones with the most transparent supply chains and the closest relationships with their manufacturers. The humanity involved in artisanal craftsmanship and in good business partnerships is the thread that we should weave into the fabric of the fashion industry. A united industry who is better suited for the next disruption. Only collectively can we shape a common future stitched solidly together with trust.
A couple of days ago, I had the opportunity to speak to Mustafiz Udin. He is probably almost a living legend in the apparel industry, being one of the most vocal manufacturers from Bangladesh. He's explaining to me how he has been an eyewitness to some of the humanitarian crises that the COVID has hit, especially for some of the most vulnerable in fashion supply chain, namely the workers. Hello, Mustafiz.
Hi, Eva.
Good to see you. It feels like a different world, right?
Completely new world.
Yeah. So obviously, the COVID-19 crisis has had massive impact on the whole world and on fashion, and in particularly, of course, also the manufacturing side of our industry. And I mean, I think, no doubt, when I look at this year, that's the biggest and most important sort of topic of the year, is what happened with our supply chain, and not least with your part of it in Bangladesh. So tell me a little bit about how things have impacted you and your business.
So I don't know how to explain you. Within a week, everything had changed. Every single thing of life, business, our workers, our life, everything had been changed within just a week.
So what do you think they should have done differently? Because obviously I'm assuming that a lot of companies were also in insecurity about when they would need new goods or when they would be reopening their stores. So how do you feel they could have acted differently towards their responsibility towards you, the workers, and the supply chain?
We should be considered as a partner, which was missing. We should be considered as a family member of the value chain, and somebody should take the phone and call and explain, okay, Mustafiz, this is happening, these things. I don't know anything when I can take the goods. I don't know what is the future. I don't know when COVID will go, but I am with you. Mustafiz, I'm not leaving you alone. Just simply one email to your long-term manufacturing partners and just wash your hand and tell that the goods are cancelled. I'm not taking your goods. The raw material purchased, we don't want to take the goods. Why should be like that? Isn't it? It would be more nice that take the phone and then tell and explain the situation.
So the words equal partnerships has been on the agenda for many years, but obviously this year even stronger. And the need to discuss how this is not just buyers buying off a plant of manufacturers, but that it is an actual partnership. So in that equation, what does trust mean in that equation?
I think the most important things is trust. I can give you one example. We work for a lot of customers where we We do business $10-50 million where the customers only send us an email. They send an email. They said that, Mustafiz, can you please book this raw material? I may need this in February or March. What we do, we don't wait for a legal purchase order from them. We don't wait for a letter of credit for them. We immediately ask our raw material supplier to do the production for us, and our raw material supplier also same thing. So if you look into the entire value chain of fashion industry, I don't know any other industry where trust is so important and where people do trust themselves more than us in the fashion supply chain. And entire value chain, entire supply chain, we work on the trust. But I think the trust had been broken this time. Trust had totally broken, Eva.
What can we learn? Is there anything that you've taken with you from this?
For me, Eva, in this pandemic, one thing I learned, we all know that how important partnership and how important relationship. We all know this one, but I think in this pandemic, this becoming a things to be mandatory. Without the partnership, we cannot grow. We cannot do any business. This is must. This is what I had learned.
Is there like one message, something that you would like to say to the brands and retailers of the world with the COVID in the back, but still, affecting our world tremendously?
I will say that maybe we have a different color, maybe we are in a different place, but we are a part of you. We are the same family. In the fashion industry, we all are family. We are someone is black, someone is white, someone is tall, someone is short, someone is Asia, someone is Europe. It doesn't matter. But we are a family, a fashion family.
Thank you. Thank you so much for spending time and for sharing your vision.
I think it would be great if we actually, as an industry, pay for the resources that we use.
By asking the first and foremost thing, that do we really need it?
I think if the industry starts to think systemically about the whole supply chain and its value chain from the very beginning to the very end of life of its garments, then we will start to see the actual positive impact and long-term solutions that we want to see in this industry.
By actually stop overproduction, I don't think it's necessary to produce what we don't need.
I think that we need to stop talking about profit in the way that we always have. That's what's feeding our growth.
The industry can ask the people making our clothes, sat on the production lines on a day-to-day basis, what are the impacts on the environment that we are having as a fashion industry in your local ecosystems?
We have enough products, so we need to focus more on experiences.
When we ask the question, who owns those natural resources, who is suffering from exploitation and pollution, and who is profiting, we realize that we need to rethink resource ownership, and that will empower communities and take care of the planet.
A couple of days ago, I had the opportunity to speak to Delman Lee. He's the president and chief technology officer of Tall Apparel in Hong Kong. We had a conversation about how better partnerships and relationships between brands and manufacturers can create more resilient business models in the future. Hi, Delman. How are you?
Hi, Eva. I'm fine, thank you.
We have smiles on our faces right now, but definitely it's been a difficult year, right? The COVID-19 crisis has affected all of our lives. Can you just tell me a little bit about how it has affected yours and obviously also the business of Tall Apparel?
So COVID caught, I think, many people by surprise, including ourselves. Of course, personally, I get to see my kids a lot more than before. Where I used to travel, now I have meetings at home and they have the class at home. So we both do our Zoom meetings and we can all talk about it. I get that's the positive side of COVID. But of course, it hits the business pretty bad. Our business is down. The whole industry, I guess, is down 20 to 40%, depending on which segment you are in. So we have to make a lot of quick changes.
Do you think there's been any important learnings? I mean, has there been any best practices that you've sort of taken with you from this crisis?
At the beginning, a lot of brands and retailers asked for delivery to be on time. So, you have COVID in at that time it's not called COVID. You have something like a SARS in Asia, but please make sure you update us when could our delivery be. But very soon after that, they said, actually, I don't need the delivery because COVID is hitting the rest of the world. So we saw a sort of a pendulum swing in attitude towards the supply chain. So for me, the learning is sort of back to good old practice of no overproduction or having lean production principles and practice in place is quite important.
So what do you think is actually needed in this relationship between the buyers and the manufacturers to accelerate sustainability?
I guess talk more about it, but more importantly is action. Action speaks louder than words. And in many years that we've been working on sustainability through a few multi-stakeholder initiatives, we find that a lot of leaders want to lead the industry, but many times we find that they do it by themselves, and it sort of goes back to a saying: if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And I think we need to see a bit more of the latter.
How do you think we can create a continuous, prosperous business model, but do it within the planetary boundaries? I mean, basically decoupling growth in volume from value creation for businesses. Do you see that happening?
So once again, very good question. So at the end, there are currently people maybe overproduce, aiming for a low price on the garment, but in effect, there are a lot of inefficiency in the supply chain. So from our business, from our own inventory management, we know that roughly speaking, 30% of the goods produced are at the end of the season for markdown. You sell less garment, less, not growth, but it's profitable because you eliminate waste in the system. So currently there's a lot of waste in the system that someone in the supply chain is eating that up, is taking that profit hit. But imagine a world where there's less overproduction, where garments last longer. You maybe do quantity-wise, maybe less business, but profit-wise, it's actually profitable. And the second point is that currently, as you know, a lot of P&L is based on tangible numbers, but there's a lot of externalities that are currently has not been priced into the products. So I keep telling anyone actually, if you want to win in this game, you need to start early to know that there is actually scarcity of resources coming anytime soon. So you should cater for it. Currently, it's not priced into your product, but one day it would be.
Thank you so much for taking the time. And we'll see you online very soon.
Circularity is but the first step that our industry should take. It moves us in the right direction, but we need to do a lot more beyond that.
Honestly, I don't know, because they still have a lot of obstacles to achieve the true circularities.
We believe that the future of design and product creation is circular.
I think there's a lot of potential in circularity, but what I see is that we really do not address the human rights and the social impact of circularity.
Circularity can take us towards building a better industry, however, not far enough and not fast enough.
Circularity is a fundamental part of the sustainability strategy for the apparel industry going forward.
I think circularity is part of the solution. I don't think it's the only one.
Circularity is the end game. That is the final goal for us as brands and designers to close the loop.
I think it's really important for the industry to give a voice to everyone in the value chain and make sure that those voices are heard.
The industry itself is made by people for people. So we have to take into account the ones making stuff, not only those with money to buy them.
The Copenhagen Fashion Summit main stage or main screen needs to elevate the voices of the workers who make our clothes.
If we can understand the making process, then we can be more mindful of the people who are involved in that.
If the industry is more aware of the steps that it takes to produce a garment, I don't know how many designers I've spoken to that really don't understand how it goes from fiber to yarn to finished fabric and so on.
By seeing garment workers as equals and giving them the opportunity to grow.
From people working at the raw material stage, like cultivating cotton, to people working at yarn mills, dyeing mills, fabric mills, they all should be granted the same types of rights, benefits, and freedoms by the industry.
And now back to the core of what this is all about: beautiful, sustainable fashion design. In the next episode of the Designer Challenge, we're with Priya Ahluwalia, who's going to take us on a journey on how to create a circular product with tech in the driving seat.
Why don't you just get one of the clapper things? Ahluwalia. For a long time, we've had maybe Asian, African stories told by European designers, and I think now it's really important that they're not told like that anymore. My name's Priya, and I'm the creative director and founder of Ahluwalia, which is a ready-to-wear brand based in London. I think I've always grown up with like values about not being wasteful. So I think that comes sort of with my heritage, like being Indian Nigerian. I think that there just is, it's definitely, there's a different energy around and different rules around that than I would say that there is a lot of more Western families. So I think that that's part of it. As I've got older and started to do more and more research, I've just seen too much with my own eyes. So I went to Panipat in India, which is the global capital of recycling garments in the world. And I saw firsthand this huge amount of scale, the huge scale of clothing that basically gets abandoned and we get rid of. So after seeing all that, I just thought there was no way that I could do fashion in a way that wasn't keeping that in mind. So I still want to be a part of it and I still wanted to be a designer, but I definitely need to think about how I can do it in a positive way. I repurpose from a design point of view. It brings some interesting challenges and you could end up with some nice surprises. So in order to make the challenge work, we looked through the collection that we were developing for Spring Summer 21 and I wanted to find a piece that really had a lot of elements to it so that the storytelling was interesting, but also had a lot of points that we could maybe communicate to customers or people that are interested in looking at what's been going on. So I chose one of the sweats in the story and it was a newly developed style for this season and it's made from both repurposed materials sourced at wholesalers and also recycled jersey. And then it also features graphics and vinyling. So I wanted to have a garment that was multi-layered and lots of different bits to track. I think fashion is really important and completely unimportant at the same time. So sometimes I question whether this job is is it actually helpful or is it doing any good? But I think at the end of the day that everyone on the planet wears clothes, so it's nice if we can design some good ones, right? And also I can feel that clothes make people feel better, it gives people confidence, so I really do enjoy doing it. But at the same time, there's so many downsides to the industry, and so I just want to try and make my business do it in a nicer way and a way that's better for the planet and for people. I've been given the challenge by Avery Dennison to integrate their label technology into one of our new styles for Spring/Summer 21. The label works with their QR code system, and the idea is that it will show anyone that scans that QR code the story and the life of our garment. So went into the past of the garment, so like the development, where the materials are from, the present story around the garment, you know, the idea that we want people to really cherish it because each one's slightly unique, how you can take care of that garment, so whether it's like special washing and cleaning directions, and then also information about the future life of the garment. So if people do get to the end of their life of their garment, we want to like show that there can be a take-back scheme so that someone could scan the QR code and find out where to give it back, and we would receive our Alawalia, then we could reuse it again. I think that there's more visibility now for like Black designers, Asian designers, than there ever has been, and I think that that's good, and it's needed because we're allowed to tell our own stories now rather than letting a Paris fashion house do like an Africa collection or something, which drives me mad.
I'm worried that people will do it again. I'm worried that people didn't learn from what's happened, didn't evolve, didn't improve the way we do things.
Post-COVID, I'm worried that we won't take any of the lessons of the last few months to heart as we go forward into the future. We need to recognize that the only way to actually meet enormous global challenges is to work together, to be honest about science, to be forward-looking about what we want, and actually create a world that is what we want to live in the future and give to our children.
I'm very worried about a breakdown in trust and communication.
I'm worried that we are waking up after COVID and we're realizing that the fashion industry has not changed to the extent it could have.
I'm worried about the people that we have in power right now, about the patriarchy, about a return to business as usual and excess as usual.
I'm mostly worried about the workers who are working in this industry, and they're the most vulnerable in this industry.
I believe that we will survive this pandemic as a species. I am extremely worried at the environmental crisis because I'm not sure if we're going to be able to survive that.
I'm really worried that the grim financial situation of fashion companies in the coming months is used as an excuse to not rebuild the fashion system.
I worry we are moving backwards, focusing solely on economic recovery and disregarding environmental considerations.
I am so deeply worried that everything will go back to business as usual.
To broaden our horizon and to learn to think differently, disrupt our minds, we need to listen to voices that are unlike from our own. In the next Real Talk, we've given the stage to Claire Farrell. She's an activist by heart, and she's one of the founders of the Extinction Rebellion. We've allowed her to come with her personal opinion on her view on fashion and the course we're heading for the future.
I want to open by saying that I believe our leaders are failing us in catastrophic ways. And I think it's time that we have to look to ourselves for the leadership that we need. We need a future based firmly in solidarity. Now in business, we know that we require a certain amount of continuity. And with the unfolding of extreme weather events, we know that this won't be possible. And in the fashion industry, we also know that our roots are in colonialism. When you take in the reality of our situation, for me at least, it brings a certain amount of grief. And I find that can transform you. I think our best human values require us to disobey a system which is firmly set on self-destruct. And what's on the other side of that decision is probably quite a lot of difficult feelings. Feeling your awareness growing, feeling yourself complicit in creating the situation that we're in now. To be real, I do think it's clear that some rich people, some rich countries and some rich businesses quite simply need to help to pay to change the direction that we're heading in. And I also want to say in the fashion context that I don't think circularity is nearly enough. We need to aim for regeneration. So Extinction Rebellion has been set up to encourage people to peacefully break the law. And for me, you find the courage and the tender-hearted bravery that requires by facing the truth. Facing up to the humility that we don't know all the answers. So I invite you all to get ready to let go. To think about how you can move forwards taking none of this personally. Because Extinction Rebellion and other campaigners are not going to give up until the risk to life on Earth and our human family is reduced with every day and week and month that goes by. We know that empathy is a pragmatic necessity for the very survival of our species. And for that we need to repair ourselves. We need to repair our relationships. We need to repair our systems. And we need to be ready to engage in transformation. We're so very nearly out of time.
And now to something completely different. Join me in taking a deep breath as Nike is going to guide us through a meditative session of mindfulness and resetting our minds to be ready for all the next live sessions of CFS Plus.
Hey, I'm Brandon Collins with Nike Master Trainer. Welcome to day 2 of your CFS Plus journey. Yesterday, we focused on balancing the moment we're in by pursuing collective action. Today, I urge us all to embrace our individual and collective ability to create better systems, better methods of make, and more spaces for inclusion and growth. All right. So I want you to find a seated position, whether it's a chair or a cushion or even the ground. And we're going to dive into a meditation not only designed to recharge you, but also designed to bring your vision and your intention to life in the most powerful way possible. So once you find your seated position, I want you to close your eyes and tune in. And first, I just want you to begin to observe. Observe your body. Observe your breath and ask yourself, what are you feeling? Really just begin to notice. Notice what you're feeling. And with your awareness, I want you to scan your body from head to toe. Do you feel heavy? Do you feel light? Do you feel stressed? Whatever you're feeling, just observing it, just noticing it. And slowly, I want you to begin to incorporate your breath. So bringing your inhale deeply in, and then on your exhale, allowing your air to flow completely out. Completely filling up on the inhale, exhaling everything out on the exhale. And I really want you to begin to expand your breath. So like we talked about in our last session, breathing deeply, deep into the stomach. And on your exhale, allowing all the air to flow away. And even beyond just breathing into the stomach, I want you to really begin to breathe with the whole body as if your cells are completely involved in the process. As if your entire body is breathing and participating in each breath. And as we become a little more rooted and centered here with our breathing, I want you to begin to progressively relax the entire body, first starting with your toes. Toes relaxed, and then the tops of your feet and the bottoms of your feet also relaxing. Your ankles relaxing, and your calves and your lower legs becoming light and full of energy. Knees relaxed, and thighs relaxed as well. Entire lower body completely relaxed. Allowing your hips to relax, your lower back, your stomach, and your rib cage. All light, all relaxed. Your middle back and your upper back, all tension dissolving away. And your chest so light that each inhale you feel your chest rising and falling. Your shoulders relaxing, your arms, your elbows, your forearms, your wrists, your palms, your fingers, and your fingertips all relaxed. Your entire body from neck all the way down to your toes relaxed. Jaw relaxed, all tension dissolving away. Mouth, nose, eyes, ears, everything relaxed. Forehead, top of head, entire body in a relaxed state. And it's in this space of awareness and relaxation. I want you to visualize your highest expression, your highest impact. Remember, everything is possible. If you can see it with your eyes closed, you can touch it with your eyes opened. What does that look like? I want you to invoke all of your senses. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? What do you taste? What does it feel like? Energetically, what does it look like? Completely allow this vision to come to life. See the colors of this vision. Feel it as if it's already become a part of your reality. Staying with your breath, staying in the moment, and staying in this space of infinite possibility. Remembering that change, true change, starts with you as you begin to lean in to your self-care and you begin to lean in to you being your best self. Inevitably, that vibration, that state allows you to make bigger impact on the collective. A few more breaths here. I really want you just to tune in and breathe in to that place of infinite possibility, remembering that everything is possible. Staying with your breath, staying present, staying in the moment, staying in your power. With the eyes still closed, I want you to bring your hands together. Eyes are still closed, and we're going to begin to rub your hands together. And you're going to feel some heat begin to arise in the middle of the hands. This is an ancient technique. I want you to see your intention, see your vision in the palms of your hands, and then infuse it with all of your gratitude. Keep rubbing. And when I say release, with your eyes closed, you're going to place your palms over your eyes, blocking out all light. In 3, 2, 1, release. tune in and one last time, really begin to see the vision, your highest vision, in its ultimate expression. Slowly, hands begin to come down, eyes begin to open, and welcome back. It's an honor to be able to practice with you today. Remember, health in the body, peace in the spirit, love in the heart. I'm Nike Master Trainer Brandon Collinsworth. Namaste.
I get excited about people finally understanding, believing, and engaging in the change we've been talking about for the last 10 or 15 years.
There's going to be a need to innovate faster so that there is big impact for the welfare of many, not just the few.
I'm excited that the world for the first time in many years has actually faced the same challenge together and has started to understand the incredible value of being open, of being honest, about being forward-looking, about actually deciding what's the world we want to live in instead of just living in fear or trying to fix problems as they come up.
Despite so much hardship, I'm excited about rebuilding a better fashion system.
Post-COVID, what I'm the most excited about is the opportunity to leapfrog and bring the future forward, with sustainability, of course, at the heart of it.
I'm cautiously optimistic that fashion might actually try to make proper systemic change to the industry rather than just using the Band-Aid solution.
With COVID-19, we've shown how much we can change when we're really motivated. And that's so exciting.
I am excited about the opportunity to put workers at the center of recovery efforts and for workers to have a say in how supply chains are designed and governed.
Value is a certain type of quality that make people care for and desire certain things or experiences or relationships.
Value is all about perspective. It's all about changing our perspective.
Value is everything that affects our decisions, goals, and behaviors.
Value is something of importance.
It's what you can't put a price on, but you can feel.
Value is something that we can all agree is worth something. And I think that in the past that's been money, but there's so many opportunities for things that could be different.
Value is beauty, it's joy, creativity, and purpose. It's not money.
Value is the relationship you have to nurture with your garments.
Value is meaning.
Value is something which we each get that genuinely contributes to our quality of life.
I don't know if we can make the biodiversity crisis in fashion more tangible. The brutal reality is I think people don't really care. I don't think they're going to care.
Biodiversity is living within planetary limitations.
It will take a grand collaboration.
How do we move forward? We move forward by translating the language of biodiversity into the language of everyday business.
When it comes to land-based fibers, we have significant opportunities to really improve how we're delivering on biodiversity, moving into rotational grazing, responsible forestry practices. So this is an area where I think we can really excel in the coming decade of delivering concretely on biodiversity challenges.
Sharing stories and narrative about how the choices that we make as designers, as brands, as retailers, and ultimately as consumers actually impact wildlife and biodiversity.
We need to work between local farmers with ancient knowledge, as well as scientists with data-driven high technology.
We should make a firm commitment of spending certain percentage of the revenue
for biodiversity conservation.
It's about communications and educating and making what could be a topic that could be very academic, making it very simple for people to understand.
Helping people to understand the origins of the products that they consume and the importance of the ecosystems that support those products.
There are solutions in place today to help protect biodiversity. Transparency is obviously very, very critical.
The sustainable design thinking must be involved with natural science.
And now we continue with the CFS Live segment. The first of these plenary panels is focusing on what, in my opinion, is the most pressing topic of our time, climate crisis. I know everybody has been talking COVID, and this year has been a big year for that. But in this year, what has been painfully visible to me is the lack of actions taken on the climate that we've proven we could when it came to the COVID crisis. However, Global Fashion Agenda and McKinsey has just come out with a groundbreaking report, Fashion on Climate. And this is what this CEO-led panel is going to debate and dive into. Enjoy.
In 2016, the United Nations signed a treaty to reduce the emission of greenhouse gases. This is known as the Paris Agreement and pursues efforts to limit the global temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is often referred to as the 1.5 degree pathway. From rising sea levels to extreme rainfall and more powerful heat waves, the consequences of climate change can no longer be ignored, either by society or the fashion industry, which will see many impacts on its operations in the years ahead. In 2018, the fashion industry produced 2.1 billion tons of CO2. This represents 4% of global carbon emissions, an emission share larger than that of France, Germany, and the UK combined. Fashion needs to act on climate, and we need to change things fast. Because if we continue on our current path, we will miss our 2030 emissions targets by 50%, and this will accelerate global warming. So how does the fashion industry take on the challenge of massive CO2 reductions? Over the next 10 years, the fashion industry must intensify its efforts to cut CO2. In practice, that means embracing accelerated abatement to reduce annual emissions to around 1.1 billion tons, which is about half of today's figure. This sounds like a daunting task, but the good news is that 55% of these efforts will actually save money for the industry. In order to understand how we can reduce emissions, we need to understand the fashion value cycle. The fashion industry comprises a complex ecosystem of processes, products, and services, and this is what we define as a fashion value cycle. It encompasses material production, fabric preparation, wet processes, retail-related activities, garment usage, and end-of-use activities, such as recycling and circular business models. A diverse range of actors and intermediaries are part of this cycle, and all can play an active role in cutting greenhouse gas emissions and combating climate change. In fact, 60% of the accelerated abatement potential lies with suppliers and producers, 20% within brands and retailers' own operations, and 20% with customers. Everyone has a role to play. Manufacturers. Garment producers need to be fully committed to decarbonization programs to deliver accelerated abatement. For example, switching to renewable energy, making efficiency improvements in spinning, weaving, and knitting, and shifting to dry processing. However, producers will need support from brands to decarbonize. This is where 60% of abatement potential lies, so the industry needs to come together to make that happen through coordinated and collaborative approaches. Brands and retailers. Brands have direct control over their own operations, but also have significant influence across the value cycle. At the moment, every fifth piece of garment ends up as garbage, without ever being worn. So one of the most effective things that brands and retailers can do together is to ensure that overproduction of clothes is reduced. Customers. By making small changes to the way we treat our clothes, customers can substantially reduce carbon emissions in the use phase. Things like skipping 1 in 6 washing loads, washing half of loads at below 30 degrees Celsius, and substituting every 6 dryer usage with open-air drying can actually make a big impact. As well as adopting circular models, which could deliver 10% of accelerated abatement alone if 1 in 5 garments in 2030 are traded through circular models. Investors. 60% of this decarbonization requires some form of upfront investment. But fortunately, the positive link between environmental performance and financial performance means investors have a direct interest in creating incentives that promote change and enable fashion players to accelerate their efforts. Beyond 2030, even if accelerated abatement is achieved, the challenge gets tougher and the industry will need to decouple value growth from volume growth to stay on the 1.5 degree pathway. Only by daring to change, collaborate, and embrace new systems can we transform the industry and create prosperity for communities around the world. So, no matter where you are on the fashion value cycle, act today to safeguard our future. You can get the full story on how the fashion industry can fight climate change with more examples, facts, and inspiration in the McKinsey and Global Fashion Agenda Fashion on Climate report at globalfashionagenda.com/initiatives/fashion on climate.
Hello. Welcome to the Fashion on Climate CEO session. My name's Samantha. I'm the CEO of Red Carpet Green Dress. We're a women-led organisation focused on bringing action and dialogue to the topic of sustainability. We'll be starting this session with an overview and a bit of an explainer about what you've just seen by McKinsey and the Global Fashion Agenda. And then we'll have a very interesting panel discussion, and I will introduce our fantastic panelists after this particular segment. So I wanted to kick off by introducing Carl-Hendrik Magnus, who leads up McKinsey's Global Apparel, Fashion and Luxury Group. He also heads up the EMEA retail operations practice. He's very passionate about building a more sustainable fashion industry, and he leads McKinsey's multi-year partnership with the Global Fashion Agenda, co-authoring the recently published report, Fashion on Climate. And we have Morten Lehmann, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer of the Global Fashion Agenda. He is an established expert in sustainability, and he leads the content team. So we have him and his team to thank for the Copenhagen Fashion Summit, in addition to core publications such as the Pulse of the Fashion Industry Report and the CEO Agenda. So thank you for being here. Morten, could you just share a little bit about what motivated you and what it took to do the research for the Fashion on Climate report?
Yes, thanks a lot, Samantha. So what we do at Global Fashion Agenda is we really try to guide the industry and to mobilize the industry to take bold action. And to do that and to move the needle even further on sustainability, we formed this strategic partnership with McKinsey. And this report, the Fashion on Climate report, is the first joint publication we're doing. And what we've really set out to do with the report, and you just saw the explainer, is really to establish the big why. I mean, why is it we need to act now, seeing that we are 50% off the target in terms of being on the 1.5 degrees trajectory? But more importantly is that the report really establishes where we need to prioritize. I mean, there's so many things industry leaders can do on sustainability, but also on climate. So this report really establishes where do we prioritize, which are the key levers you need to pull for the maximum impact. And what it also does is actually calculating the cost of pulling these levers. But maybe, Carl-Hendrik, you can speak a bit more to what it took to do the report, and also the cost and the investments behind making sure that the industry actually stays on that 1.5 degrees pathway.
Thanks, Morten. That's an extremely important point in our view, that a lot of our clients are asking us which targets they should set, whether they should subscribe to science-based targets, and especially what the economics of the abatement are. I would argue there's a fair bit of uncertainty around those. And we wanted to establish something that's called the cost curve, actually a tool used by many industries since almost a decade, and so far missing in the fashion industry. What is the cost curve? It's a tool that understands for every lever that we have at hand, upstream, in the brand control, in the consumer influence, what is the abatement potential in CO2 reduction, and what are the economics for a given abatement? So what do we need to pay, or how much will we save if we are trying to abate a certain amount of CO2 equivalent? We're working with some of our clients on doing that on a company level, but we wanted to do that on an industry level because we feel it's a very important tool. And the good news is not everything costs money. So looking forward to the discussion and hope we can add some fact-based into this discussion with the report.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. And as they both so skillfully alluded to, this conversation is really to help us demystify this a little bit more, but also think about how our industry leaders are tackling this challenge. You know, personally, I'm very passionate about connecting the dots and helping people understand fashion's contribution to our climate change challenges. Greenhouse gases are emitted throughout the fashion value chain, from agriculture and production to transport of garments across the world. And so this understanding and this dialogue will hopefully help shift our industry in the right direction. So with no further ado, I'd also like to start by introducing our panelists. Also, just so you're aware, there is a space at the end for questions, so please do send these in. We want this to be a dynamic space. We believe there's no such thing as a silly question, so all are welcome. And in addition, if there is any kind of lack of clarity about any of the terminology used, I will explain it, or the panelists will further allude, so that there's no grey areas there. So starting with our first panelist, we have Joey Zwillinger, who is the co-founder and co-CEO of Allbirds. He is very passionate about making things from renewable resources, and that has led him to start Allbirds and begin tackling sustainability in the footwear industry. Before that, he spent 6 years in biotech, leading renewable chemical business solutions and developing and selling high-performance algae-based chemicals in various industries. So fascinating. He's also worked in advisory and investment roles at the likes of Deloitte Consulting and Goldman Sachs. We have Dipun, who is the managing director of brands and distribution at the Escal Group, a global leading textile and apparel manufacturer. She's been actively involved in education and the arts, holding leadership roles in Harvard University's Asia Center and Hong Kong West Kowloon Cultural District Authority. So extremely unique perspective here as well. She was also selected as a young global leader by the World Economic Forum. We also have Rakhil Herderamani, who is the director of the Herderamani Apparel Group. He is an experienced director with a demonstrated history in working in the fashion and apparel industry, with strong professional skills in garment manufacturing, apparel technologies, and international business development. So key insights here, which I'm very, very excited to unpack. Thank you all for being here. Welcome. I wanted to dive in with our first question. And this is kind of let's just crack this open and just start where we're at. And the first question I had is, why has the fashion industry, despite all the awareness that's out there, not yet managed to leave this negative emissions trajectory behind? And what impact do you guys believe that the COVID crisis has had on the situation? I'd like to start off with Rakhil, if you don't mind.
Thanks, Samantha. I think it's been a lack of clarity in the industry. It's not been a one-size-fits-all. And brands are usually chasing the cheapest source of manufacture, whether it's fabric or production. And this leads to a conundrum, right? It's all about clarity and consistent benchmarking.
Okay, then. So thank you for that insight. I'd like to unpack that a little bit more, but I wanted to answer the same question to Deepin. Do you think you could share your thoughts on that? Why do you think we've not yet managed to leave this negative emissions trajectory behind? And how has this year and the COVID crisis impacted this?
I mean, I think, the reality is the fashion industry exists within a culture of consumerism and materialism. And especially, I remember reading the Ellen MacArthur Foundation report last year and watching the numbers of how often a garment is worn, the number of wears before it is discarded. And the rise of fast fashion, you start to sit there and think, well, if we're making more and more stuff, how are we going to do it with less and less? The textile and apparel industry is also one that's actually very, very fragmented, right? There's a lot of different players in it, and it's not just about one person saying this is what we're going to do, but it's trying to get a lot of different stakeholders, a lot of different companies, and a lot of different countries involved and ready to make moves. So I think it's been a very, I think we all know that this is a problem at Escal. We've been working on it very, very hard, and I hope to be able to talk about that a little bit later. But I think the thing about COVID is, if you ask me what changes with COVID, is two things. One is we realize that COVID and pandemics as such are a result of climate change and the changes that we've made to the environment. And I think that is a very high level wake up call to certain types of people. But moreover, I think these lockdowns that we've seen in so many different countries, where people now are sitting at home and they're reevaluating what they need to really be themselves and to lead a good life. And I think with that, we're going to see a real shift in consumer behavior that will really drive change in how much people want to buy and what they want to buy, not just in fashion, but across all services and goods.
Absolutely, well said. I think this has been such a game-changing year that, in fact, if things don't change after a year like this, when will they ever? Joey, I'd love to know your thoughts on this question as well. How has COVID impacted this situation we're in, and why has it taken so long? Why are we still where we are?
Yeah, well, thanks for the question, and thanks for having me today. I think the biggest thing that's been eye-opening, and I'm in San Francisco, and obviously that's shaped my perspective a bit, just seeing what's happening in the US particularly. And I think the interconnectedness of our species as a human race has never been more clear. And if you can see that collective action is truly the only way that we're going to get out of the biggest messes that we face, I think the pandemic was a great lens into that. And I would hope that people have started to understand that climate change is equally, if not more, of a global challenge than what we're facing today from a public health perspective. And I think that's been shown in the data that I've been looking at also, which is quite encouraging. And if I look over, we started Allbirds 5 years ago, roughly. And in that time, I would say that consumers in the early days really wanted to have a great product. And it was nice if it was also sustainable. And I think what's happened in the last 5 years has been a dramatic shift in a way that has really surprised me, and how consumers are now making purchase decisions based on more than just your traditional features and benefits, and are really considering sustainability. And I just to the premise of the question, I'm not sure there was so much awareness. And I think the study that McKinsey's put out has been has lifted up the curtain a bit for people in the industry, at least. And I think that will translate to consumers. So while I think no one would doubt that we're in a bit of a dire situation and we need to act immediately, I do see some glimmers of hope here, and the way consumers are shifting, and what we're talking about at this conference, and the real work with real data behind the recommendations is quite encouraging.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I do agree with what you've said around consumers. And I personally link that to education. And I think we have access to information that we didn't necessarily have before, that we can digest and translate in a way that we weren't maybe capable of doing before. But you did touch on data there. And I think that's a very good segue to my next question, because we're a big fan of metrics and accountability. We need to know what we're measuring to understand whether we've moved in any direction at all. So the report does allude, and it does really confirm the importance of having specific targets and being able to be transparent about these and to track these targets. I'm keen to know a little bit more about how your respective organizations have been setting targets and what you need in order to set those specific commitments. I'd love to maybe start with you, Joey, if you don't mind, and then I'll jump over to Deepu.
Sure, yeah, that's it wasn't easy to do this in the way that we now do it. So it's taken us a bit of time, but we started when we launched our first product just to count the carbon emissions and understand the pollution, and just a fundamental view that businesses should be responsible for the pollution they create. And so in order to do that, we first had to count and understand what exactly our pollution was. And so we built a tool internally, and I think there's been developments now where people can access tools to get basic life cycle analysis of your product's carbon footprint from very beginning of the value chain all the way through to end use and disposal of the product. And I think that, so we started with that. Once we understood our impact, we were able to then, and we knew intuitively we were on the path to making a smaller footprint than the rest of the industry. We started to try to really reduce that dramatically, and have made a lot of changes as a result of just an understanding of where our products were. We went carbon neutral by utilizing a mix of reductions in our product footprint and then carbon offsets. That was, I think we did in early 2019. Okay. And now what we've done is we understand our entire footprint for the company. we label each product with the carbon footprint that we score for each of these. So what we're trying to do is add transparency for the consumer so that they can compare product within our portfolio and hopefully against other products in the industry, not just based on price or quality or style or other attributes that they think are good for what they're looking for from a product, but also based on its impact on the planet. And so once consumers are educated on that, now we can start to shape the way the industry is talking about it. And internally, then we need to drive that down. So we drive it down through financial incentives with our carbon offsets so that we have a cost to each bit of pollution that we have as a company. We put it into our compensation. So we have specific targets that we tie executive compensation to and reductions on an annual basis, and a whole bunch of other metrics such as how we decide to trade off cost of product. Perhaps that's sometimes an increase of our product cost. If it's going to have a positive impact on the carbon score, we can make that trade-off objectively, and we think about that through an objective lens. And so we've made all of those changes inside the company to help bring that transparency and do that in a way that really is authentic and ties our fate to that of doing something better for the planet.
And that's very much looking at, and I think you already said this, but throughout the value cycle. So it's very much consumer focused, but obviously you're looking at your raw material inputs as well. And I think that is probably the only way that we can tackle this issue. It has to be a very thorough vetting of what we're putting out into the world. Deepu, I would love to hear your thoughts on this and how you've gone about looking at setting targets within your organizations, if there are specific things you need to be able to do that you may or may not have already.
So we started publishing our numbers in 2005. We do set targets in 3-year increments. And just to share, for 2019 to 2022, our goal is to reduce energy by 7.6% per unit across the organization and water by 6.4%. Now, these are the high level numbers that we give to every single person in the company. But obviously, we do measure at a much more detailed level for everything from nitric oxide, sulfur dioxide, concentrations of flue gas and dust, COD in terms of discharge, and various other things. Now, it's actually quite difficult to measure because, the reason we use a blanket number is because to be able to get down to every single product just requires our latest factories actually do have a lot more measurement devices within along different machines, et cetera. But to be able to say like this Oxford shirt uses this much water, energy, et cetera, honestly, it's so dependent on everything from order size, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the hardest things for us in setting these targets is also not being 100% certain of what the product mix that will be coming into our factories will be over the coming years. So I think to be able to measure, you not only need the hardware, but you need the ability to understand the numbers. So we actually do have a lot of engineers, and we actually make the sustainability targets part of the GM's KPIs, but they're collated by a sustainability team at our head office. But yeah, I mean, I think it sounds like a really great thing to do, and I definitely think everybody should be doing it, but it wasn't easy to start, and we continue to find ways to improve these numbers every year, not just in terms of how we're doing, but the level of detail by which we're able to understand things so we can better optimize.
I think this is such an important answer because this is kind of the transparency we need when we talk about the challenges faced. And when you mentioned about kind of knowing what's to come or what that order mix might be in the future and the unpredictability of that, that's an important insight to understand why this might not be something that's always readily available to share. Not that the interest isn't there. Raquel, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this briefly before we jump to the next question, because I know you're very much at the kind of upstream kind of garment production end of it as well. And I'd love to hear your lens on this.
Yeah, absolutely, Samantha. So, we started our sustainability journey in 2007, and we built Sri Lanka's and Asia's first custom-built green factory in 2008. So, our focus as a contract manufacturer has been predominantly on energy efficiency and sustainability within the 4 walls that we operate in, which is, people, planet, and profit. And what we've realized is people are the heart of our workforce and our business. So that's our top priority. But having said that, last year we were able to announce that we were certified net zero as an apparel manufacturer here in Sri Lanka. That was done by installing evaporative cooling, solar power, offsetting some of our energy through wind power assets that we own as part of the Hydromani Group. So the difficulty we've had in measuring our KPIs is we've done so much work prior to the introduction of science-based targets. We're already starting from a significant disadvantage when we try and make our commitments on further reductions. That doesn't mean we're not committed to reducing further. It's finding the tools, as Dee really mentioned. We need to retrofit our existing facilities with so much technology that changes on such a rapid basis. Right. It becomes a cost challenge,
right?
Which is something we're really debating and trying to figure out. The beautiful part is, it is becoming cheaper now. We've got amazing systems, by using the power of cloud computing that enables us to analyze this much quicker than ever before.
Yeah. I think, again, you've hit another really crucial nail on the head here, is that this needs investment, that we need to be seeing the business opportunities and investing in this so that you can do what you need to do. Let's move on to the next question, which is around pace, an area of contention for me within this industry, because I feel that we don't move at pace. And I think the year we've had demonstrates that when the onus is serious enough, we can be an extremely agile and fast-moving industry when lives are at risk, or God forbid, when profit losses seem to be an issue. So I have challenges with the pace at which our industry has moved, and we need to step into this space of accelerated abatement. We know that, but to be able to do that, we need genuine, non-competitive collaboration across the value cycle. And just for people who might have a lack of clarity about what we mean when we talk about the value cycle, we're talking about everything from raw material extraction, fabric preparation, garment production, across to transport, retail, and product use. So it's the entire chain. How do you see this as leaders within our industry? What does this willingness to collaborate at scale look like for you? And I'll give that over to Joey to start with.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
I'd love to hear everyone else's perspective. I think looking at the cost abatement curve in the study, I think it's eye-opening. I mean, look, you see where the biggest impact can be made. It's in upstream production, and if you look at upstream production, kind of two buckets. One is the energy generation that's required, that Rakil just mentioned, and that's a really critical component to what the life cycle of a product is. And the second is materials. And I would say that on the first one, the biggest driver by a mile is going to be, or kilometer, wherever you are, is going to be in policy change. And we need collective action to advocate for policy change, to drive generation of different kinds of power. And there's a lot of different levers that can be used. I think the United States is unfortunately a significant laggard in its contribution into this, and has the biggest opportunity to make change. And whatever the mechanism is, it needs to put a price on carbon that flows through to energy generation. So that's point number one that I do think has created a challenge for the industry at large, because it's very difficult to impact that. But materials is where I think we can all collectively make a big impact. So if you look at the very upstream of materials, this is typically, in a lot of cases, it's large chemical manufacturers. When you're talking about synthetic fabrics, which are a predominant use in the industry, we've tried to avoid those at Allbirds and use a bunch of natural materials. But really, the vast majority of the industry relies on synthetics from petroleum. And these producers are high capital intensity, huge facilities. And in order to, each one company is a drop in the bucket when it comes to the output of those chemicals, polyester, nylon, anything like that. When you have these large facilities, you need to come together in the industry and have collective cooperatives and say, we'll both come in, we'll all come in, we'll buy this, and we'll share kind of that cost, so that the manufacturer can actually invest in lower carbon intensity manufacturing practices and lower carbon intensity sources. So it's not just from petroleum, but it's also from my previous background, from something as crazy as algae or something using green chemistry. There's a lot of technological solutions out there, but it does require a number of companies to come together, because any individual company, no matter how significant, is not big enough to move the industry. And to us, that's where the collective action can be struck. And I think there's great examples that have already been in play here that in the footwear industry, at least, where we've been a part of, that we'd love to share with people.
I absolutely hear you, Laudi, and I can see Raquel nodding with great enthusiasm, to the point where I need to zing this over to you and get your thoughts on it. And just so you know, we've got kind of a little bit before we have the questions, another 15 minutes, and we will of course open this up to questions at the end. But Raquel, you were too enthusiastic, so I wanted to know what you were thinking.
So Joey, you hit the nail on the head, right? It's all about open sourcing some of this the manufacturing secrets, which a lot of brands and manufacturers see as their USP. I think it's a case of coming to the table, stop talking and take action. We have a great story here in Sri Lanka where we worked with a third party where we collected bottles off the coast of Sri Lanka by school children, threw it in for closed loop recycling, converted it into yarn, and it turned into an A6 garment. But it's a great story, but it's at such small scale here in Sri Lanka that our customer turned around and said, why don't we open this up to every other brand and manufacturer? Because if you grow on your garment side, we'll grow on our recycling side. And that's what collaboration is all about. It's exposing our supply chain, radical transparency, and stop trying to use it as a competitive advantage.
Yes.
I just maybe one add to that. I think that the very far upstream in that cycle, like if you think about the polymers that are used for nylon and polyester and that stuff, that's not where people get their competitive advantage from. It's what happens downstream of that. So what I would just encourage as an industry is focus very far upstream, and we can share. We've done this with like the midsole unit of our sneakers are all made from a sugarcane residue. And that's the very base material is not particularly proprietary. And so we've decided, let's open source that innovation to everybody. What we do with that to make it sweet foam downstream of that is magic. And we're going to keep that to ourselves. But that doesn't mean that the impact of the climate from that base material can't be enormous by sharing that core material.
Brilliant. Well,
Samata,
yes.
Oops, sorry, Samata, just one thing to add to that is, D will probably back me up on this. If you see our 3D, I'm hoping, if you see our 3D development, it's gone through the roof during the COVID era. Yes. And what does that tell us? It forces us to be inventive only when there's a crisis. We've been advocating 3D since 2012. Where are all those samples today? We've been able to revolutionize, but it's taken a pandemic to force us into it. And if you look at waste and carbon, and even within the upstream apparel supply chain, just look at the sheer number of samples we make and how many of those are actually thrown into landfill or destroyed because they're proprietary.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the report makes a very great case about unpacking what those upstream operations are and how they are linked to our emissions. And we are aware that as much as 70% of emissions can be traced to upstream productions. We must make it clear, though, even though that's the percentage ratio, that doesn't mean that upstream producers are responsible for the weight of decarbonizing the value cycle. Far from it. It's just showing you the attributes. At the end of the day, if brands aren't requesting certain materials or aren't requesting certain processes, this is a dynamic conversation. It's not a one-way relationship. And so on that, I'm keen to know, Dee, if that kind of ratio split between where the emissions are traced, i.e. how heavily they lie in that upstream part of the product creation, did any element of that surprise you? And what do you think it will take to address that at scale?
I mean, so going back to what I mentioned at the beginning, the idea of how often, I think it's 15 times that we wear a garment. Correct me if I'm wrong, if anybody has the statistic off the top of my head. But, the average times a garment is worn is so small that the idea that most of the the carbon footprint, the emissions footprint, the water footprint of this product is upstream does not actually shock me. One thing, I didn't mention very clearly is we are vertically integrated textile and apparel manufacturer. What that means is we do everything in terms of cotton. We buy cotton. We also work very, very closely with farmers, helping them figure out how to do drip irrigation. We help them breed red-eyed bees, and that reduced pesticides by 20%. And we work all the way downstream until we ship that shirt. So we gin cotton, spin yarn, knit and weave fabric. We make buttons, we make poly bags, and then we make clothes. So we are very, very involved in this idea of like, what does this 70% number mean? And how do we deal with this? I would say, one thing that's missing is this idea of product. So Rakil, he just spoke about recycled poly product. We actually have a product that we did last year that was around recycled cotton. And what I learned from it is that actually, if you're working with recycled cotton, and because of the way we did it, you actually recycle the dye as well.
Yes.
Basically 100% of the water footprint from cotton is in farming. And it's only 18% of the energy use. And so understanding really like what's using what and where, that's going to really make a big change. But then from there, now we have this product, we must collaborate with the brands, because exactly in the example earlier, if there's not a market for it, we can make every interesting and green product in the world. But again, consumers have to buy in, and they have to want this product, and they have to want it more than the dirtier product. I don't even know what to call it, than the dirtier product, sorry, for lack of a better term. So what we're really trying to say when we talk about collaboration and pacing is one of working with not only people upstream from us within our own organizations, but also with our partners in the brands to try to understand what consumers want. And then alongside that, though, also, two of our favorite words at Esquel are trust and respect. And predominantly, we normally push these two or use these two words when we describe how we work with each other inside our community. So an example of this is in 2017, we got rid of every single locked door. I mean, so in our offices, you used to have to call up admin if you wanted a new paper notebook and a new pen. In toilets, if you needed more toilet paper, again, you call admin. And in the fronts of every factory was a security guard who checked every single bag of every person walking in and out. And in 2017, we said, you know what? This is completely disrespectful, and it shows that we don't trust you. We're going to get rid of all of this. Now, what I've found in terms of sustainability and pushing sustainability targets in our industry is it's often done in a way that is rather disrespectful, and really one where you expect us, the upstream manufacturers, to not care or want a better future and a green future. And I think
May I just jump in there, because I think one of the points you've made is about, I think, the premise of this entire summit, it's redefining value. And that point that you've just made is how you value people, how you value organizations, and how you create an environment of value within those organizations. I wanted to jump to just one more question, because I would love the opportunity, and we have so many great questions in chat, to give this to our audience. The last question I personally had that we pondered was this idea of what the future looks like. And, we've talked about how, as part of a long-term vision, the industry has to aspire towards a full business transformation. We're not talking about business as usual. We can't go back to normal. Normal wasn't working. So what is that vision? What mindset do we need as an industry, as organizations, and as citizens to bridge this gap between goals and intentions and targets and action and reality? I'd start with you, Joey.
Sure. Yeah, I think what Dee was saying is I share the view quite significantly that it's got to start with the consumer. And I think, in my past background, I had a similar experience to Dee, where I was making low carbon intensity materials and selling them into brands. And I had a very frustrating experience because brands didn't know how to translate that into stories that resonated with consumers. I think consumers care more now than ever. If consumers are made aware of what the choices they're making and what that impact is on the planet, I think we can see some fundamental shift. And so, as a challenge to every brand, to start labeling with what your carbon impact is, your carbon pollution of every product, that will help educate consumers and start to really shift the dialogue. And from that very downstream, what the consumer wants, brands will follow, manufacturers will follow that, and hopefully even we can galvanize some policymakers to kind of follow where the momentum is and actually change all the energy generation. So I think that's where it's got to start. That's where the transformation has to be.
Excellent. Let's legislate. I'm all for that. Raquel, could you have any perspectives on this this future vision, how we bridge the gap between intention and action? Oh, Raquel, I think we've lost your audio.
Signs of Zoom fatigue, right?
It's okay.
I think the first piece is, just stop talking and take action. It's about committing and actually leading from the front. I think we've seen this on the front end development side, where we offer sustainable solutions, as Dee mentioned, and they sit on somebody's desk for weeks, months, or even seasons in some cases. It's about working together around the table and bringing that fragmented supply chain into a single dialogue, because as a manufacturer, we cannot do it alone. As a brand, they can't do it alone. It's about openness, transparency, and collaboration. And I think the touch point there is we now have the technology in place to ensure that traceability is possible.
Yes.
And that's the exciting thing.
Okay. Briefly, Dee, can I get your answer on that? And I'd love to send it out to questions because we have a few and I want to make sure some of these get asked.
No, I mean, I actually very much agree, but I think, again, we need to engage and educate everybody. Yes. So for us, that is our upstream partners, our suppliers, our even, our customers, as well as every single person on our production floor. I don't think that this is going to happen just from consumers saying we want green products. Even though there's transparency, it's too easy to greenwash. It is too complicated of a question to try to drive from a consumer perspective. But really, if we get everybody involved from every part of the supply chain and the consumer side, I think, things will pick up.
Excellent. So we've got 3 or 4 minutes to go and we've got great questions. So I'm going to have to dive into some of these. One of the questions is, how can we ensure, and I think this is a fantastic question, how can we ensure that carbon emissions are calculated in the same way across all fashion brands? And I think that consistency of messaging is important. Who would like to grab that one? Just let me know who would like to answer that. Well, single you out.
I'll take a quick stab, just really quickly. It's very important. I think there are great standards. I think the SAC and the Higg Index provide some great tools that are not always accessible to the smallest of brands, but I think will be more so in the future. There's a great product out there called Duckonomy, which gives you an ability as a small brand to score your life cycle analysis from soup to nuts for everything you're doing. So, and then I think there's hopefully we're setting a great example on how to label and provide accountability in the same way across each aspects of carbon intensity of a product. So I'd say there's a lot of good examples out there now that actually provide the tools.
Okay, wonderful. Another question, if 20% of the 100 billion garments produced annually ends up in landfill, we need a moment to just appreciate that statistic, without being used, is it possible to use sales data to avoid overproduction? I'd love to know what you think. Deepoon, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it does. I think, with COVID, with the very challenging environment in the sales market, I think supply chains are getting faster and much more reactive. I don't think that sales data will get us to zero, though. And I don't think we'll be hitting one-piece manufacturing so that we're producing on demand. Yeah. But I do think the use of information can help in that problem.
Okay, I do also want to remind people that you can download the report that we're discussing on globalfashionagenda.com. So it's a really crucial piece of reading. I wanted to direct a question towards Carl Hendrick as well, who's still with us in the chat and has so much insight on the subject. We'd mentioned about kind of that vision, the future vision for bridging intention and actuality. Do you have any thoughts to add in on that before we wrap up this session?
One closing thought on, we discussed a lot what needs to happen in the years to come around collaboration. I think to raise the level of urgency even further, if we look out even beyond 2030, there's actually no way to stay on this path that we have signed up to, 1.5 degree global warming, unless we move to a much more circular economy and much more recycled materials inflow. So everything that was said is further rising, even if we basically pull all the known levers to mankind. If we want to stay on this pathway beyond 2030, we need to move to a significantly higher share of circularity in the industry and recycling in the industry. Otherwise, it's just mathematically not possible. So I think that's the sheer truth that we need to confront ourselves with. And I think a lot of the thoughts mentioned today are at least a great pathway into that.
Thank you so much, Carl, Poon, Raquel, Joey, and obviously the Global Fashion Agenda. Please do look at the report, which is on globalfashionagenda.com. We've run out of time, but thank you for your expertise. Thank you for your insight and knowledge. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
This next CFS live panel is called Rewiring Fashion. It's probably one of the most interesting conversations that has emerged from the crisis. It looks at fundamentally shifting the system that our fashion industry was built on, with drops and deliverables almost every other week, with markdowns on product in the middle of the season and huge overproduction. This discussion fundamentally shakes up how we can actually make a new system for our industry. The conversation is led by Imran Ahmed. He's the founder of Business of Fashion, and he's been a driving force on this agenda for the past 6 months. Enjoy.
Hello, everybody. I'm Imran Ahmed, founder and CEO of the Business of Fashion. And thank you to everyone at the Copenhagen Fashion Summit for making this event happen and for inviting us to be a part of it. The coronavirus has underscored that the fashion industry is broken. The system needs some change. There is overproduction, there's excessive discounting, there's an unsustainable calendar that's ill-suited to the sustainable development goals. So today, we're here to discuss how can key players within the system collaborate to reimagine how the industry can operate within planetary boundaries and also be more inclusive and humane. Back in March of this year, right around the time the lockdown started, my colleague Tim Blanks and I started receiving phone calls and emails and messages from independent fashion designers and brands around the world. Many of them were asking us the same questions. What will happen to my business in this crisis? How do I create a more sustainable business model? Do I need to participate in Fashion Week? In short, they were asking us to help them navigate this crisis. And frankly, Tim and I didn't have all the answers. So we thought, what if we brought all of these smart, talented creatives and entrepreneurs and business leaders from around the world and brought them together? And these individual conversations involved into weekly Zoom meetings with business and creative leaders from more than 60 independent brands from all over the world, focused on rewiring the fashion industry. Then, without any plans, various subgroups began to form, focused on retailers and the unique challenges that they were facing, on sustainability and the core issue of our times and how our industry can play a part in addressing it, and also the experience of Black designers in fashion all over the world. Rewiring fashion just took on a life of its own and became something we all looked forward to in our weekly chats and subgroups as the world faced a public health crisis, an economic crisis, and a racial reckoning all at the same time. So today, I am pleased to welcome Victor Glemot, Creative Director, Shira Sue Karmi, CEO of Altuzara, and Julie Gilhart, Chief Development Officer of Tomorrow London Limited and President of Tomorrow Projects. Each of them were active participants in Rewiring Fashion, and I invited them here to share their perspectives on what they have learned and where independent fashion brands can go from here. So thank you, Victor, Julie, Shira, for joining us. I wanted to start by asking you what your biggest learning, what your biggest takeaway was from the Rewiring Fashion sessions. Why did you keep participating in it? And what did you and your company get out of it? And maybe, Shira, we could start with you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when March came around, that's really when we went into quarantine and sort of everything came about. It was a huge shock to the system. Orders were cut and, there was a big change. We had to relearn how to do things. And honestly, when we first joining Rewiring Fashion, it was really just to get more information, is to see, how are the other brands doing? Were their orders cut? How much? Are they shifting production dates? What are they doing? How are they handling this? And the information piece was really interesting because it was completely unprecedented. Like, we didn't know what we were getting into. I think what was really interesting is why was it unprecedented, Shira? Why was it unprecedented? The information thing that seems really basic. I mean, the scenario was unprecedented, and there was no one to share, to get that information from. So the fact that so many orders were cut overnight, the fact that we had to relearn how to go about the design process and select fabrics on Zoom and, things like that were completely, that we didn't know we could do before. I think what was interesting and what was so compelling about the sessions was, at the end of the day, was a real sense of community. So it went way beyond the sort of like needing information and became about just sharing where you were and understanding that so many other brands were in the same position to various degrees and with different nuances, but really in the same position. And there was this really amazing sense of coming together as an industry. And this, you know, in this industry that sometimes is, you know, very competitive and sometimes is very, you know, it's not as unified. It was a really unifying force, I think, that was really exciting to see. And the even more exciting part is that it wasn't only designers, there were also retailers there and also other entities that you could see what their perspective was, and you understood that really people did come together on a lot of things. There really were so many shared commonalities and so many things that everybody agreed didn't make sense. And it was quite inspiring, honestly. So it was really beyond just helping. It was really inspiring to get to that next stage beyond and to see how we can actually improve.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Shira. Victor, how about you? You know, what when you look back at those sessions, all those weeks we spent together on Zoom, like we're on Zoom now, what do you take away from it? What do you know, value from that experience?
You know, when it started and Ikram sent me a text and asked me if I wanted to join, and I instantly said yes. And I thought it was groundbreaking, you know, sort of piggybacking what Shira said, to bring all of these global designers, small, bigger brands, you know, groups together, international retailers, just fashion industry professionals, and giving us a place to be vulnerable, to, you know, really have a sense of community, and to realize we were not alone in the things that we were all facing. And it might be a different dollar amount for another brand compared to mine, but we were all facing the same challenges. And it was scary thinking I was alone and texting with a few of my friends and talking to my friends. But once it became global, and to see that we were all facing the same similar issues and being squeezed and nervous for our livelihoods. That was one of the biggest moments to realize that we were all in this together, and we could also ideally affect some sort of change for where the industry goes, and we could continue to be groundbreaking and to be bold and to stand collectively together. It was great, you know?
Yeah. And thank you, Victor. And Julie, I mean, you're not an independent designer, but you've had, you know, relationships with and worked with designers for many, many years. You know, what did you take away from it?
I mean, I was having the same situation that you were having, where a lot of people were calling and just asking about what's going on, what can, you know, there's been a complete meltdown of my business. What can I do? So when you started this WhatsApp group, it was like the perfect place for people to land. And what I didn't realize is how isolated a lot of the different groups, whether it be designers or retailers or showrooms, that they were really managing on their own. And COVID just brought to light all the things that were not right with the fashion business, but actually amplified them. And so there was this feeling of like, you know, isolation, loneliness, and, you know, what can we do about this? And I feel like if you can help a part and be a part of that, you can actually help yourself. And I think that's what happened with all the designers, is that they immediately started talking to each other. You had high-end luxury group designers talking to a contemporary designer, and they were all sharing on an equal platform. It was benchmark. And then the retailers came together, and then some showrooms came together, and then the subjects became together, like with Victor started in the Black for just Black designers. That would have never happened from COVID if it hadn't have been for COVID. So I think what happened, and then we remember that there was the major looting in New York with a lot of these designers losing a lot of their inventory and sometimes their stores. So all of a sudden, the support group had been established. So, and it was not it wasn't directed. You created the platform, but it was all self-directed. It all of a sudden became a real working community. And I think that's not going to go away. And what's been started here is that. And I think from that, people can come together, talk about the issues, talk about what's happening and what are the different solutions and in each of these subgroups. So it's pretty incredible. And I'm grateful for that, because now all of a sudden we have a really useful tool that people can come together and solve the issues that we're still going to have to face. And also develop a new system. I mean, everyone before was talking about how the fashion system had to change. Well, it just did. So now we can build, sort of like the phoenix burning down, now we can build it back up.
Absolutely. So speaking of challenges, and that's a really positive way to start this conversation, which was, my intention, but the crisis has also broken open just how significant the challenges are that our industry is facing. And those are multiple challenges, but I wanted to ask each of you, if you had one challenge that you're particularly focused on, that you think is particularly important right now, maybe from your unique vantage point, what would that be? Shira, what's the challenge that you are, you think is like the most important challenge facing the fashion system right now?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of things about the fashion industry and how we do things that don't actually make sense. And I think, to me, one of the biggest issues is the issue of seasonality. And, when you try to explain to somebody who's not part of the industry, but who is a consumer, why, spring dresses are being shipped to the stores in November, and why winter coats are being shipped to the stores in May because of pre-collections, of course, nobody understands. And the last thing you want in May is a winter coat. The last thing you want in November is a spring dress. But the problem, and it all comes down from the markdown calendar. So basically, when the markdowns get closer and closer to the shipping dates, and that, historically, a lot of it was the American department stores with the November, markdowns for Black Friday and things like that. But the markdowns are becoming more and more, again, closer to the shipping dates of the actual season. The retailers then want the actual deliveries to be earlier and earlier. And what you see is that the delivery calendar and the actual weather and the actual demand from the consumers make absolutely no sense. Not only that, but because you push the deliveries early and earlier, what you have is pre-collection. So you have the pre-spring collection, the pre-fall collection, which are actually much larger from a volume perspective than the traditional collections that you see in Fashion Week, because that is the longest selling period on the floor at full price, which is what the retailers are wanting. And what you see is that now you need 4 showrooms a year, 4 fashion shows a year sometimes, 4 traveling months a year, which is completely unsustainable, both from a work perspective and a schedule perspective, and then it's completely unsustainable from an environmental perspective and the impact that it has on the one hand. On the other hand, the amount of creativity is usually reserved to the actual collection, to the spring and to fall, but you see all the dollars come in on the pre-collections, which are much more safe, much less interesting, a lot of times, much less exciting from a creative standpoint, which is really damaging to the design process as well. So, obviously, markdown dates and regulating them and figuring out a system that works is a very sensitive topic, especially in the US. You have issues of collusion and you have issues of price fixing, and those are legal issues that we don't want to step into. But at the same time, I think everybody across the industry, and that includes the retailers and that includes the brands, really understands that the system that we have right now is just not working. And if we can get a more pushed back markdown calendar, we can get we can get the industry to a place where it's a lot more sustainable, sensible, creative, and a lot of good things will flow from that.
Yeah. So You've raised a lot of really important points there, Sharon. I think, one of the ways I tie it all together is that actually, because of all of this inefficiency, we create a lot of waste. We create a lot of wasted product. Everything goes on sale. Who knows where, things actually end up. There's a lot of discounting, which is obviously damaging to the brand, and fundamentally, it makes businesses less profitable. So Julie, that's where I'm going to turn to you. If Shara's big challenge and focus has been like this unsustainable calendar, the drops and deliveries that don't make sense, for you, what's the biggest challenge in the industry right now?
Well, I have to say is staying in business. I mean, we have to really think about that because there's so many businesses that are just right on the edge. So we have to really look at that, and we have to fight for just the little bit of things that can help people keep in business. So that's the immediate thing that's like staring you in the face every day. But secondly, I think we have to think of a different way of approaching the fashion business, and we have to design into this. And what is a designers, for instance, which I'm always talking to, they have to think differently about designing into circularity, designing into non-waste, designing into using already existing materials. So it's a new way that hasn't been considered creative necessarily, but a creative person can make anything become creative and inspiring and imaginative. So if you think about it, if we can keep our most creative people in business, then and create an atmosphere that's without discounting, without this sort of exclusivity, I only want your collection, you can't sell to other people, that's got to go away. And we have to create this environment where they're not always having to create collections 4 or 5, 6 times a year, and can think about how to design into a more creative way of being responsible to the planet. And I mean, it includes technology for sure, and that's a big expense for many people. But it's also, it's really about thinking about all aspects of the business. And I think what we really have to go back to, and it's on repeat all the time, but the big elephant in the room still is consumption. And so until we figure out how to be profitable without driving mass consumption, we're going to be back in the same place that we always have been. So if you think about it, if you flash back to 5, 6, 7 years ago, we never thought about renting clothes. We never thought of buying luxury at resale. We never thought about being excited about a coat that was made from a material that had been made into something else. So it's these new ways of thinking about design that would be a big challenge, but I think a creative challenge either. And if you put a creative challenge to someone that is creative, they take it and they think about it and they come up with stuff that you could never imagine. That's what fashion is. And if you think about it, that emotion is what drives fashion. Like, how many times have you walked out of a show and you thought, oh my God, that just took my breath away. We can apply that to more responsible production and design, and having less of a footprint on the planet. We just have to reframe it, use the tools that we have, use the support groups, and start to do this together. I don't think it's a solo journey. And I think the next challenge for the designers and creative directors is to work with each other and together on this. It's not affordable to be able to do it on oneself. And
Julie, let's
talk together.
Yeah, let's put it to our creative on our panel, Victor. Shara's talking about this unsustainable calendar, the discounting, the drops, the kind of mismatched schedule. Julie's talking about designing into the problem and figuring out how to introduce new business models that still enable people to enjoy fashion without necessarily relying on kind of endless consumption. Where do you see the biggest problem we have to solve as an industry?
I agree with both of those issues. I think those are very big pressing issues. However, this summer I was really like driven and awakened to this reckoning that is happening in regards to our industry about race, and the idea that I've perhaps felt this, in my career, that every Black designer has the same skill set, the same creative vision, the same knowledge is actually tokenizing. What I do versus, the 15 other, great designers out there is completely different. And, this idea of diversity and inclusion is our marketing buzzwords that a lot of people use and throw around. However, this summer, when I started talking to young brands and bigger brands and creatives, and everyone sort of felt the same, that they were dealing with the personal issues of what was going on with the racial reckoning in America and all over the world, but also professionally. And people felt alone and siloed, and I had never realized that, So putting together this group that was a subgroup of Rewiring Fashion and quickly became independent, I made that really one of our focuses of building a collective unity for us to get to know one another, because that hasn't really existed in fashion because of the schedule, because of time, because of competition, because of all of these different things that Julie and Shira mentioned. And now us creatives coming together, where our collective power, and when you can't sort of chip us apart and say, we have so-and-so here, we have this one there, so we've checked our black box, but I dress everyone. My clothes are for everyone. My clothes are done in a sustainable way. I only use natural fibers. We use a lot of stock service. There is no overconsumption. I think as much as there's a business strategy behind what I do, we need to recognize that this idea that we are lumped together in an industry where it's, the 50 best Black-owned brands or whatever it is actually demeaning, because that doesn't happen to our white counterparts, our Asian counterparts, and the world we are in now, the consumer is looking for an authentic discovery. They're looking for a point of view, and there is a new luxury consumer, and how people consume things is different. I think I'm one of the few people I know who's actually been traveling this year. I've been in Luxembourg, Antwerp, and Istanbul recently, and I see Virgil sneakers, I see Telfar's bags, I see them mixed with like beautiful Italian, high-end cashmere. And I've seen that in every city I just mentioned. And this is the world that we're living in. And I think our industry is nostalgic for a past, for a way things have always been done, a traditionalism that the consumer is not interested in, because no one wants a spring dress in November. You're gonna buy it in May when you hopefully are going on vacation or whatever you wanna do, you're going to a wedding, that's when you wanna buy that dress. And I think one of the several issues facing this industry is this idea that people will bend to fashion's will when that has proven it is not working. No one's interested in that. And it's about truly supporting talent and thinking differently in all different aspects of it. I think that's what this is about.
Okay. So, adding up, a lot of what each of you has brought to the table today really kind of, encapsulates the variety of the discussions that we were having during Rewiring Fashion. But the thing that I take away from all of you is the role of collaboration, is the role of, putting down these walls and artifice and divisions that our industry has kind of propagated for years, whether that be Condé Nast versus Hearst, or LVMH versus Kering, or one designer versus another designer, or one group of designers versus another group of designer, or a big department store and another department store. And so for me, what was so revelatory about Rewiring Fashion and the way it happened was that actually by coming together and sharing information and collaborating, it's almost the only way we're going to be able to get through all of the problems that you guys have laid out for us today. So I wanted to ask you, there's a lot of questions. I'm just looking at some of the questions coming through from the audience, and one thing we haven't yet discussed today that I'd love to hear your perspectives on is workers' rights. I think the other thing the pandemic made really clear was that certain members of our industry, of our community, either people very early in the supply chain, the people who are making the fabrics or making the clothes, or retail and warehouse workers who are kind of at the other end of the supply chain just before things reach the customer, they have borne the brunt of this crisis, and so many people in the chat here are asking, what do we as an industry need to do for our workers? And I know that most of you are more on the kind of luxury end of the supply chain, right? So your things are made in Europe or made in Italy, or but there are also challenges and problems in our supply chains as it pertains to luxury. And if you've read any of the articles about, garment workers in India, whether they be, working for factories producing for fast fashion, or people producing for luxury, when all of these orders started getting canceled, as you mentioned earlier, Shira, it was these workers that were left without jobs. Like, what do we as an industry need to be doing to think more about everybody in our supply chain, everybody from the garment workers all the way to the retail workers? I don't know, Shira, maybe you have some thoughts to share on that first.
I mean, I think that first of all, is recognizing that responsibility and seeing how every actions that you have, whether you're a brand, whether you're a retailer, whether you are a manufacturer, everything reverberates and everything has a ripple effect. So when the retailer cancels the order, they go to the brand goes ahead and cancels the order, and the factory, if they can, or deals with whatever they need to deal with, including laying off workers. So it really is a ripple effect. And I think one of the ways we can deal with it is exactly what you were talking about before, which is communication and coming together. I think it's very important that you have open communication with every entity in the supply chain. And I think the more communication there is, then you're able to deal with the issues, and then you're able to confront them. So for instance, when we were impacted by the retailers, we turned around and talked to our manufacturers, explained what our situation was, and worked together on a plan, whether it's a payment plan, a weekly or a monthly payment plan, so that they know that money is trickling in, so that they know that they can turn around and pay their employees, making sure that that communication is in place, I think is extremely important. And the same thing goes to our warehouse. We have a warehouse in New Jersey, for instance, that was really impacted by COVID. They were understaffed, and so really communicating to them as well about what our volume is going to be, so that they can plan ahead, so that we can really work together. And I think what COVID has brought about, which is exactly what Rewiring Fashion was all about, is that we are all one ecosystem. And I think the more we recognize that and work with each other, the more we can mitigate the impact on each one of the specific elements in it.
Julie or Victor, do you have anything to add?
Well, for me, as someone who started my brand really focused on a category, I really think it's about knowing who your partners are at every level, whether it's your warehouse, to your freight forwarder, to, everyone in your supply chain, your mills, your fabrics, everyone, because then you can actually have those conversations honestly. And, I was lucky where I was able to pay every single person that I worked with through, grants, through, other stimulus things. And that was really important to me. And the transparency of saying, we're going to pay you on this day at this time when this comes in, that matters. When it was April, May, and there was so much uncertainty. And for me, I've always tried to do that in terms of how I operate my business, because I just feel that's the way I want to be treated. We had really frank conversations with retailers. We pulled out of people from the very beginning that were not proper partners, or I felt that we're not proper partners. And now we're actually talking to those people again and having better conversations for the future that I think could be really beneficial for them and for us. So I think it's really about being clear about what your goals are and how you want your business to be perceived and how you want to be perceived as well, because we're all in this together. If one part of this crumbles, it all crumbles. And I'll never forget, I saw something where like Dries Van Noten has someone in India who manages all of his like embroideries and all of that. And that's the type of idea that has to go into every part of your business, pre-COVID and especially, during and post.
Yeah. We've had another question come through, which I think is a really important one to address. And Julie, mentioned that, some brands might not survive this crisis. It's kind of the elephant in the room. And as government support, through furlough schemes and other, protection schemes begin to kind of be wound down, some of the support that businesses have had relied upon to kind of survive or at least get through this initial phase of the crisis is no longer going to be there. So, what are your views about the need for the fashion industry, basically to have fewer players, that we're going to have, companies that are just not going to make it through this crisis? Is that a good thing? Or is the industry weaker for it? I don't know, Julie, if you have any thoughts on that to begin.
Yeah, I think that it's out of our control, really. So in terms of that vision of fewer players, but I think that we have to, change is really hard and it feels awful. And so I think that's really what this whole thing is calling for, this industry to change. And so, going back to what you were talking about supply chain, it even, if you're an organic farmer, you have your sources and you commit to them. So we have to stand up to these commitments. So if you're a fashion designer and you're committing to a manufacturer, you need to stay committed through, rain or sunshine. But I think that the need to think of different ways to do business is critical, and innovation is critical. And it could be as simple as Jonathan Cohen pivoting to drawing flowers and doing flower deliveries, or some of the other things that many people have pivoted to, masks and PPEs. That's a temporary solution, but that's a big pivot for a lot of people. They saw an opportunity to keep their workers busy, to keep some cash flow going until they can actually come to a Jesus moment of really knowing what is their new direction going to be. And as Ellen MacArthur always says, it's a time for unprecedented collaborations. We do not need to prove anything to anybody anymore. We don't need to hold up to this certain status that the fashion industry requires of brands. You don't have to do anything like you did in the past. In fact, if you do it differently, you're more of a hero. So it's absorbing that process that I think is really critical. And I think as a group, we have to work together.
Julie, you didn't answer my question, so I have to push you there. Is it okay if designers have to close their businesses? Is that okay? Because I think the other stigma we have in this industry is that it's not okay to fail and it's not okay to have to start over. And I think we kind of need to overcome this idea that, you know, every brand that exists in the industry, you know, has to continue to exist in its current form.
Well, I'm sorry I didn't answer your question, but I would consider that part of the equation. Definitely. You can close your business and restart as something else. That is part of radical change. And we've seen it before. I mean, classic example in the US is Marc Jacobs, you know, went out of business several times. And, you know, who knows, he may do it again, but, you know, you can always reinvent yourself. And now is a time of reinvention.
Yeah. Shira, Victor, anything to add on the kind of landscape? I mean, you're both, you know, independent brands based in the US, and, you know, I'm sure you're having the same conversations I'm having. There's some real challenges out there that are still coming down the road. You know, what does it mean for someone to have to close their business?
I mean, a lot of things, yeah. Go ahead, Victor.
It's not what you want, but it's an outcome. You know, when I started doing this business, someone told me, like my good friend Patrick Robinson, mentor, he said, "There's 3 ways your business is going to go. You're either going to, you know, continue. You are going to get like, you know, you can sell it, you can own it, or you can go out of business. Those are the 3 things that are going to happen to your business. And the third one, you never really consider, you know, but it's very much an outcome. And I think now more than ever, there are people who are not interested in doing fashion the way it was and showing at the same cadence, at the same speed, you know, with the same amount of stuff. And all of that is possible. And if you want to pause or take a hiatus or completely leave and, you know, go open a bed and breakfast, great. You know, I think right now, why not explore the ideas that are meaningful to you and not meaningful to, you know, an industry.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry that we only have like a couple minutes left. So I wanted to conclude by asking you each for 30 seconds so that we can fit each of your responses in on the thing that's giving you hope for the fashion industry in 2021. You know, we're almost at the end of what has been an extremely challenging year. But as you look to 2021, I want to end on an optimistic note. Julie, what are you optimistic about for next year?
I'm optimistic that I think that industry is beginning to feel like the new cool could be planet over profits. That just sounds right now. But it's not at the expense of creativity and imagination or diversity and inclusion. That we're thinking first about the planet, and then we're thinking about how to make money. And I think that's a big shift. And I'm hopeful for that.
Indeed. Okay. Shira, as you look ahead to 2021, notwithstanding the challenges that might be in the path ahead of us, what are you optimistic about?
I think the businesses are doing what they need to do. I think they're cutting costs. I think they're getting more efficient. I think they're focusing on their customer and what their customer actually wants. And I think that those businesses that can do that will be much better off for it on the other side of it. They'll be running tighter ships, and honestly, the end consumer and the environment will be better off because we'll be making less product, hopefully selling it full price, and you know, and getting further ahead.
Okay, Victor, I'm going to leave the last words here for you. What makes you hopeful for next year for fashion?
I'm a hopeful person overall, but for me, I think it's really about, I hope we can dive into the unknown head first. I think it's far more exhilarating and financially rewarding as well.
Okay. Well, I want to share what makes me hopeful before we conclude. And, I have to say, when I first came into this industry, everyone kind of warned me, oh, you better watch out. It's a really cutthroat industry. Everyone's always out to one up the other person. And I have to say, like, you really get this, they say you get this sense of someone's character on how they behave during a crisis. And maybe you get the sense of the character of fashion on how we behave during the crisis. And while all of the decisions that were made, by all of the companies, like some of them are regrettable, but for the most part, when I saw our industry come together through things like Rewiring Fashion, but all of the different initiatives that have cropped up over the last 6 months, whether that be In the Black or the Black in Fashion Council, or, all of the work that's being done in Lebanon around, the crisis that's happened there, and the creatives coming together there. It really showed to me that the character of this industry is very different from the way everyone made it out to be to me when I was first starting out. And so when I look to 2021, I think we're going to need a lot more of that spirit and that energy and that intention of just letting down all of the artifice. Because there's one thing true, is like everyone in the industry, while they behaved during this crisis in a very collaborative way, as Julie said, they pivoted to PPE and, hand gel and hand sanitizer and all the things that we needed. For too long, I think our industry has had too many false conversations. There's been too much artifice in it. And so what I'm hopeful for is that we'll collaborate more. And what I'm hopeful for as well is that, we can just all be ourselves in this industry, because that way we can find out where everyone else needs help and we can help each other. And so, I wanted to conclude on that note, and by thanking Julie and Shira and Victor, not just for their time today, but these have been 3 of the most active participants in driving Rewiring Fashion, which has really been a group-led thing. I only just organized Zoom calls, but it was the group of people that really made it all happen, and it's just been super inspiring. And I'm grateful to Eva and everyone at the Copenhagen Fashion Summit for inviting us to share for the first time a little bit about how it all happened and kind of what we've learned from it. And for those of you who are watching and listening and want to learn more about Rewiring Fashion, please visit rewiringfashion.org. There's the manifesto there that's been very carefully crafted. And I can tell you that there's more to come. There's more work being done by people like Victor and Shira and Julie. And we hope to share more ideas, more provocative direction, and more inspiration on how the fashion industry can be rewired. So stay tuned for more from us in the coming weeks and months. And now it's my opportunity to thank you all and bid you all farewell. And thanks to all of you for joining us from wherever you are today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was all from my part. It's been a pleasure hosting the CFS Plus this year, although almost all alone. I'm very impressed with all the visionary statements that has come from many of our industry leaders and all the bold commitments, but I also have to flag that time is still of essence. We have a lot to solve, and we have less than 10 years to actually break the curve. And the longer we wait, the more expensive it will become for everyone on the entire planet. I will make this one commitment to you all, then myself and my team will work tirelessly to do our effort in creating more resilient business models that will encompass the needs for our planet's boundaries and also preserve social justice. Now it's time for more live sessions. If you can't remember which one you were attending, then go to our website for more information and find your guidance. This is all from me. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm looking very much forward to seeing you next year.